on this computer. All right, so I want to start by showing you all a graph. Oh, it's not showing up there? Oh. Guess if it's not connected, it's not going to show up. All right, so I want to start by showing you all a graph. And this is kind of self-esteem across the lifespan, but for all practical purposes, you can also think of it as happiness across the lifespan. So here's the graph. Moving. Okay, for whatever reason, the clicker is not working. So the graph has age on the x-axis, right? Starting at around 9 years of age, all the way to 90. And then, like I said, self-esteem really on the y-axis is what the paper measured. But for all practical purposes, we can replace self-esteem with happiness. And you can see that there are some ages in which happiness is high. I would say the very young age, we report high levels of happiness. In the study, they did not include participants below the age of 8 or 9 for relatively obvious reasons, right? The kids may not really understand what you mean by happiness, and they're probably not interested in taking surveys anyway. And happiness is decently high at old ages. Although there's a lot of variance, as you can see, some people are really kind of like almost hitting nirvana, right? And other people are not so happy. And it's kind of easy to understand why some of the people, when they get really old, report low levels of happiness. Because, their partners have died, or the friends are dying, maybe they have physical ailments. So it's kind of easy to understand. But it is interesting that there's a lot of people who are really, really happy at very old ages. Right. In fact, in the research, the happiest age on average, right, there's a lot of variance around it, but the happiest age is around 65, okay, 65 to 70. When you have presumably kind of understood what life is about, you've learned a lot of life lessons, and you're using them to good effect, and you still have some level of control over your body, right? You have physical autonomy. You don't need help from other people. Your friends are still mostly alive, etc. All right, I'm going to leave this up for a little bit and see if you have any questions. The upper graph is men's reported happiness, and the lower graph is women's. And you can see that there's a big difference. Women in general tend to report low levels of happiness. And one of the reasons for it is that women may be a little more honest than men, particularly in cultures in which men are supposed to hold it together and are strong. We don't like to report what we truly feel, which is not very good. Suppressing emotions is not good. We have talked about it. I have a paper on this, men and masculinity. And this is culture dependent as well, of course. So especially in a state like Texas, right? Men are supposed to be strong. And we don't report high levels of happiness. And so women tend to be more honest, and men tend to report higher levels. That said, there could still be a big difference. And this is worldwide. And around the world, women in general tend to have it a little bit worse in terms of circumstances. They don't have as much freedom. Physical safety, etc., is a bigger concern for women than it is for men. And also, women, even in this day and age, right, tend to earn a little bit less. They have less access to resources. It's more of a man's world, right, which is changing around the world, and it's better in some countries than others. But it still is, unfortunately, the situation in a lot of parts of the world. Okay, so I'm going to leave it up, like I said, for a couple of minutes. If you notice anything that you think is interesting, you can raise your hand and ask. Yeah, Jordan?
So my interpretation, this is a year. So like 2022, these are the reported happinesses, right?
This is actually from 2011.
Okay. I think it'd be really interesting to see that again, but across years, and then to kind of overlay in one, so you can kind of see how a person shifts, or a generation, I guess.
Generations shift. Yeah, that's actually a very good point.
As well as just the overall, like what's kind of the trajectory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things that I can guarantee is that the happiness levels of teenagers is already low, Actually, I misspoke. It is not from 2011, it's from 2003. Okay, this is like quite dated, 22 years old data. I can guarantee you that right now, if you were to measure teenagers' happiness, it would be even lower, especially for girls, right? I think we might have talked a little bit about it. You know, there's a book out by Jonathan Haidt, came out on the 28th of March, called The Anxious Generation, which is this next generation after you guys. You guys are all Gen Zers, right? For the most part, right? The next generation, really unhappy as teenagers. And I think I talked a little bit about my daughter being in that age group. And there's many reasons for it. I think the big one is just being on social media and social comparisons, which I'm going to talk a little bit about in just a few minutes. Anybody else notice anything else that you want to comment on? All right, so one of the course's objectives is to see if we can avoid some of these dips, right? You're around the age of here, right? 20, 23 or so. And, you know, if we went about business as usual, chances are that we're going to see that little bit of a dip, right? And then probably going to be happier when we are older, right? And on here, the dip might not look like a big dip, but, you know, it is significant. You are going to be, you know, not in a very positive emotional state. And the idea is to see if we can avoid it or at least mitigate it, right? And many of the things that I've talked about, if you were to implement them and incorporate them in your life, chances are that you're going to fare better in terms of not just your emotional states, but also in terms of your outcomes, in terms of the health of your relationships, in terms of the chances of success in life and so on. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to talk about some, I think, important tips that come out of this course, come out of research on happiness. And this might, you know, be a reminder / reinforcer of some of the things that we definitely talked about in class, but also things that you might have started to incorporate in your life, okay? So I want to end with these 5 tips for happiness. And I want to start with a quote by Aristotle, who said, happiness is the highest good, meaning to say that he felt that everything that we do in life is so that we lead a happier life, so that we lead a more meaningful or fulfilling life. So it's a broad kind of definition of happiness. And obviously, I'm kind of like, you know, preaching to the choir here a little bit, in the sense that you guys have chosen to enroll in this course. So you obviously recognize that happiness is important. But even for people who are not taking the course, I think this would be a fair statement to make, that everybody seeks to lead a emotionally more fulfilling life, right? Feelings don't just matter. I think feelings are what mattering even mean. If something matters to you, it's because there is an emotional reaction or response to that thing, right? If children matter to you, that's because, or career matters to you, or health matters to you, that's because there's a lot of emotions riding on that, right? We are highly emotional as a species. So I want to talk about some tips. And before getting into the tips, I want to very quickly point out that prioritizing happiness is a very important thing, right? So not only do feelings matter, it turns out that if you do prioritize happiness, do prioritize mental health and feeling emotionally positive, then other beneficial effects are likely to accrue to you, right? So not only are you likely to feel happy, by definition, you're prioritizing happiness, you're also likely to be a better human being, right? So if you really do want to focus on this seemingly self-interested or selfish even goal of being happy, there's no way to kind of avoid being a good person. If for no other reason than strategically, we depend on other people for our outcomes. And so we have to be good in order for them to do good to us back, right? So you end up concluding from the kind of starting point of being self-interested in maximizing your own happiness, that it is best to be other-oriented, or at least, you know, also other-oriented, in addition to being self-oriented. So you need to be an otherish kind of giver, right? Without it, you're not going to maximize your happiness. Of course, you know, you don't want to do it strategically. You want to really make it part of your second nature, right? It becomes a habit where you just kind of sprinkle compliments throughout the day. As you go along, you notice somebody wearing something nice, you compliment them, right? If they do something good to you, you kind of like, immediately try and do something good back in return and so on and so forth. So it becomes something that you don't even have to think about, right? That's the power of the habit, that you no longer are strategically nice to other people. That's your nature, right? And if you do it, then of course, you also are likely to be successful, because as we have seen, givers tend to be more successful than, takers for sure, but even matchers. All right, so there is a win-win-win strategy here, which is kind of an odd thing for us as human beings. We tend to think that life is compensatory, right? That if you get a great attribute on a particular product, for example, something is really tasty, we tend to assume that it must be unhealthy, right? If we end up dating somebody who's like seems amazing, and we can't believe our luck, we tend to think that, oh, there must be a catch to this, right? So there's no such thing as a free lunch, all right? No pain, no gain. We tend to think of life as being compensatory in nature, but really, if you kind of sit down to think about it, many of the things in nature are not compensatory. In fact, they build on each other, right? There is this kind of like synergistic compounding effect that goes on. And so if you prioritize happiness, you actually are going to also enjoy other benefits in your life. There's no catch, right? And you have to kind of think through that and experience it in order to realize it, okay? There really is no catch. You just go for it without any, holding back. You're going to experience that. So, okay, so here are the tips that I want to leave you with. The very first one is make healthy lifestyle a non-negotiable, right? You all are at an age where you can afford to abuse your bodies, okay? But there'll come a time, okay, and that's the better alternative than not even, living to see that age. But there'll come a time when you can't. Okay, and one of my friends once asked me, I own a BMW, right? And she asked me, would you put the kind of low octane, whatever gas, the 87 gas into the car? And I'm supposed to, use the 93, whatever the highest level of pure gas is. And I said, no, absolutely not, right? Because it's going to screw up the car, potentially, right? Because that's what they recommend, that I put in the more expensive gas. And then she asked me, how important is my body to me compared to the BMW, right? Obviously, it's infinitely more important to me. So why would I then abuse my body, right? And this was at a time when I was, not doing so well in terms of that dimension. And that really kind of stuck with me. And so I've been trying to prioritize happiness, right? Prioritize my health. And obviously, that's reflected in the assignments. This is the assignment that had 2 parts to it, and I really focused on it. So you don't have to do like everything right, but if you do a few things right, I think it's going to have a big effect. And so one of the happiness hacks, healthy lifestyle hacks I recommend is having a shot of, 10 veggie smoothie every single day when you begin, right before breakfast or with breakfast, or it could even be a breakfast if it's, big enough. There is a really good show on Netflix right now. We live in a very lucky age, I feel, where we have access to so much information that's so useful. There's a good show on Netflix called Hacking Your Health. I'd recommend watching it. It's about an hour and a half long. And it talks about, in particular, microbiome diversity. So, we have bacteria in our gut, we have bacteria all over our body, really. And it turns out that the microbiome diversity, which is the diversity of the bacteria that live in your gut, is so important, much more important than we ever thought was the case, right? So it determines many diseases, including Parkinson's, it turns out. And it also has a huge effect on our mental health, right? How happy we feel. So I'll just give you a little bit of a snippet. One of the studies, they took the microbiomes, or basically the bacteria, and this sounds really gross, but they do it through taking, small sample of your poop and kind of, drying it out and putting it inside a pill. And they gave the microbiome of a very happy person to a rat, right? Or a bunch of rats, and also the microbiome of a depressed person to another bunch of rats. And then they measured the rats' kind of happiness levels, right? Including the tendency to explore and, generally play around and, socialize and so on. And they found that the rats that had gotten the happy microbiome bacteria were significantly happier than the ones that got the depressed person's microbiome. So really does affect our health. And unfortunately, even if you're eating a lot of vegetables, it turns out that the set of vegetables that we tend to eat tend to be restricted, right? I mean, it's kale salads, for example, all the time, okay? So we need more vegetables than we generally tend to eat, even if we lead a healthy lifestyle. And so the idea here is to have 20 to 30 different vegetables every single week, okay? 20 to 30 different kinds of vegetables every single week, and higher the number, the better. And in the video, they show this guy who's like, who makes a smoothie out of 60 vegetables, right? And vegetables and fruits, I should add, okay? And has a shot of it every day. But at the very least, you can like put in 10 vegetables and fruits, right? So I can tell you what I do. I put in spinach, cucumber, beetroot, celery, apple, banana, chia seeds, which I kind of count as a vegetable, okay? Ginger, and I'm blanking now. Avocado. There's a 10th one. Anyway, so I put in 10, and then I make a large batch, and I pour it into little shot glasses and put it in the fridge, and have one shot every day. Yeah. Smoothie and or a juicer. I don't know. I would say that smoothie would be better because it retains all the fiber, right? The juicer probably gets rid of the, those things. But having a juice is better than not having anything. And I can tell you that this has made a big difference to my general level of, feel goodness from the inside out. I just feel settled stomach-wise, and it's huge. Even if you do it just for a week, I guarantee you're going to notice a difference, right? Of course, the amount of difference you notice is going to depend on how unhealthy your current diet is. But even if it's very healthy, I think that it's still going to make a difference. Yeah?
I was going to recommend that fennel. The
Fennel?
anti-inflammatory.
Oh, okay. All right. Will do. Thanks for saying that. Okay. Do you do something like this?
Yeah, I'm like really into microbiome.
Oh, okay. Did you see the show?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'm studying.
All right. I actually am very interested in doing a marketing project on this to see if people with different microbiomes tend to choose different kinds of things. So in the show, they actually talk a little bit about it, that if you've generally eaten a lot of sugar, then the bacteria that like sugar are overpopulated in your gut, and they then transmit to the brain that eat that sugary thing. So when you think that you're actually wanting sugary stuff and you think that it's actually your microbiomes wanting it. It's crazy. Okay, right. Thanks for sharing that. Fennel. All right, I'll remember it. So another hack, moving more, take the stairs every chance you get, right? Little kind of change that you can make I saw Melody taking the stairs today, and I've been doing it, right? And later on, I'll talk a little bit about, you can have some rules around it. You don't have to take the stairs if it's like, you got to go to the 80th floor, right? But if it's like below, let's say 8 floors or 5 floors or whatever it is, right? So, once it becomes a habit, here again, the power of habit, then it just becomes automatic, right? You don't think about going to the elevator. You just kind of take the steps, right? It just happens. And you're actually thinking about something else, maybe a project or whatever, but you're getting that exercise in, okay? Sleep better. I've already talked a little bit about this, but get sunlight for 5 minutes as soon as you wake up. Just go up, right? Just for 5 minutes. It's going to set in motion a bunch of downstream, chain effects that are going to be beneficial for you, including getting a good night's sleep at the end of the night, end of the day. Okay, so that's tip number 1. Tip number 2, minimize social comparison. We have talked quite a bit about it. So one of the biggest banes of happiness, biggest kind of detractors or deflators of happiness is just comparing to other people, right? And we tend to compare to people who are better off than us. It's called upward comparisons. And, there's an evolutionary reason for it. We want our lives to be better, right? And so we want to aspire to do things that other people seem to have achieved, and there is some merit to it, right? But it does come with this huge negative byproduct of lowering our happiness levels, okay? So we've talked a little bit about cognitive reappraisal and putting things in perspective. Here's a quote that I really like by Sam Harris. I'm going to play you guys a video, an audio clip from one of his lectures in just a little bit, right? But I really like this. You know, there are at least 1,000 people on Earth at this moment, at this very moment, who would consider their prayers answered if they could trade places with you, right? So just remembering that, you know, whatever your problems are, you know, now I can't speak to your specific case, but chances are very, very high that whatever your problems are, there's a significant proportion of people who would trade their problems for yours, okay? If nothing else, you know, they don't have any guarantee that they're going to even get the next meal, really, you know, or the children are going to get the next meal, or even the safety of themselves or their family is at stake, right? They don't have medical attention, they're caught in a war zone, in a slum, etc. So just kind of putting that in perspective, I think can lower the chances that you engage in social comparisons. So in a book, I read this kind of quote. I'm not going to kind of remember it exactly, but basically it said something like, we tend to compare ourselves materially with people who are better off and spiritually with people who are worse off, right? So we see somebody cheating on an exam or doing something bad, and we say, you know what, we have this kind of holier than thou perspective when we look at them, that I wouldn't do that, you know, that they're so kind of like, you know, bad. But if you kind of reverse it and compare yourselves to people who are materially worse off, not from the perspective of, you know, hubris or, hey, you know, look at you, you're so bad, you know, worse off in life, but rather from the perspective of just feeling grateful, and compare oneself to people who are spiritually, you know, superior, so to speak, that will really change things. I also like this quote, right? Life is the most difficult exam, and many people fail because they try to copy others, not realizing that everyone has a different question paper. So basically, the way that I interpret this is that, you know, we've been dealt a deck of cards, and, you know, for example, born into a certain family with a certain set of genetic propensities, good and bad, in a certain country, etc. And so our deck of cards is entirely different from what somebody else has got. So whether somebody achieves something or doesn't achieve something, you know, it has some relevance for us, right? Because it points to what we can do too. But really, I mean, because our starting points are so different, and our tastes and propensities and inherent interests and aptitudes and everything so different, right? There's nobody quite like us, really, when you think about it. So why kind of, you know, really engage in this social comparison with other people when really your set of questions was totally different in life, right? Okay, so minimizing social comparisons, some tips here. So having rules for amount of time that you spend on social media, right? Even if you do spend a lot of time on social media, it's better that you spend it with the aim of nurturing your hobbies or interests or connecting with people on those things, rather than seeking affirmation from other people, right? Comparing the number of likes you get to likes that somebody else got is not a good thing. Focusing on flow and nurturing flow. So even if it's not happening at work, at least have a hobby, right? That you kind of can get into flow states, because when you get into flow states, you're not really kind of comparing yourself to other people, right? You're really enjoying the activity for the activity's sake, rather than for the outcomes. By the way, I'll share all these slides, obviously. So it'll be up on Canvas. You can look at them later if you want. And then finally, practicing creative altruism, right? So just being nice and kind to people in small ways. It doesn't have to be very big. I love Mother Teresa's quote on this general topic. She said, we cannot all do great things, but we can all do small things with great love, right? We can do small things with great love. So you don't have to make a big impact. Sometimes I don't like, you know, UT's kind of mission statement or whatever it is, you know, what starts here changes the world. There's a lot of ego in it, I feel. You know, it could be the potential for a lot of ego. Why do you want to change the world? You know, what's the big deal about changing the world? It's existed for like 4 billion years, Earth has, and the universe for 14 billion years, according to Big Bang Theory. This idea that, you know, I somehow want to change the world. There's a little bit of this, you know, suggestion that the world is in a bad place, and that, you know, without me wanting to change the world, I lack importance, and so I'm going to go and change the world, right? I much rather come at it from the perspective of I'm going to do small things, but with a great deal of love, right? But with also some level of humility that the intentions are going to be there. Who knows what the consequences are, whether they're going to be good or not. And I feel like a lot of the negative consequences that we suffer as a society and as a world is because of this desire to be a big change, right? Or a change maker, including, climate change and stuff. Anyway, so one kind of interesting idea, I don't know if you guys think this is interesting, idea I have here is that you don't necessarily have to, put in a lot of your income toward donation or charity, right? If you just consider shopping as an act of charity, where you say, you know what, I'm going to hire somebody to be a helper at a party, right? And I'm going to hire them. I don't need to hire them. I could have done it myself or, had my kids do it. Or I'm going to get a massage from somebody, right? So you're giving people money in order for something that they want to do. And I think it's actually a better thing to do than to just give people money. Because when you just give people money, there is an element of, not really respecting them as much, not respecting what they do, or not giving them a chance to nurture their skills and talents and what it is that they want to be good at and what it is that they're offering volitionally, hopefully, to the world, right? So the idea here is to think of the dollars that you spend, right, as an act of charity. Now, you want to be careful here because if you kind of give yourself the license, therefore, to shop for anything and everything, then there is a chance that you might become materialistic and all that. So you've got to kind of apply a little bit of self-awareness here. But in general, I would say that if you're hiring somebody to do a service, then you're not, kind of like going down the path of being materialistic. You're not acquiring something that has is a physically tangible, right? It's an experience or a service you're spending money on. And in particular, if you do that in contexts in which the person receiving it is not, as materially well off as you are, then I think that, probably not going to be a lot of negative consequences of doing it. So, in fact, I'm going to start working on this general idea over the summer. I know that, Nisha, you said that you'd like to collaborate on research. So if anybody else is interested in collaborating with me on any research, just let me know. I have a few projects like this going on. All right, tip number 3, prioritizing relationships. I sent you all the TED Talk by Robert Waldinger on how important relationships are for us. The number 1 predictor of long-term psychological health and also just longevity, right? Just you're going to live longer if you have a bunch of healthy relationships. And unfortunately, though, loneliness is a big growing epidemic, particularly for men in the United States. And there's kind of relatively straightforward reasons for why it's happening. As you get older, you tend to want to obviously, prioritize your career, right? And so you therefore have less time to devote to friendships. And in particular, if you get married, right, then your spouse or significant other has to get along with, not just your friend, but also their spouse. So that just makes it, much more difficult for you to be able to hang out. And then if you have kids on top of it, right, not only does it restrict the amount of time you have now, but now your kids have to get along with their kids, and so on. So unless you actually kind of actively, consciously prioritize relationships, chances are that you're going to become lonelier and lonelier as you get older. And this is particularly true for men, it turns out. Okay, women are better at staying in touch. So here are the 3 tips I have. One is the suggestions. One is to take at least 1 vacation a year with friends, kind of like budget time, budget money, and talk to your spouse. If you're not yet married or whatever, you're not in a relationship, maybe have a conversation about this as one of the kind of important things for you, right? That, I'm going to do this. Every year I'm going to go scuba diving with my guy pals or, women pals, whoever it is, whatever your hobbies are, right? That's number 1. Nurture companionate love with your romantic partner. So, if you remember, there's passionate love and companionate love, and passionate love turns into companionate love later on in life, and it's super important. And, in some ways, much more important than passionate love is. And it builds off of common memories and common goals. And so take time to spend time with your romantic partner outside of the outside of the house context, right? House is about raising children and chores and getting dishes done, etc. Not conducive for promoting, pleasant common memories. Not conducive for spending quality time. So kind of being deliberate about it is very important. And then visiting friends and family at least once a year. So this happens kind of organically in the US because of Thanksgiving, but sometimes, there's a temptation to take that time and go elsewhere, right? Not visit family. So I would say that, not doing that and making it a time when you do visit family is an important thing to do. Okay. Tip number 4, practice mind regulation. I really love this quote, William James. Adult human beings are kind of the only species for whom our emotional state is tied to what we think, right? If you think about babies, if you think about animals, they're caught in the moment. And if there's a lion chasing a zebra, the zebra is going to get stressed out, right? But 2 hours later, there's no stress hormone left in the zebra's bloodstream once the event is over and it survives. But we are not like that. As adults, we tend to stress out about so many things that, in fact, most of our life we spend as an adult with some at least low level of stress and anxiety at every point, right? And that's because we have lists of things to do and obligations, and somebody said something, and there's taxes coming up, and there's career, and there's health, and this and that, and it's all in our head at some level or the other. We are kind of like almost like it's one of those lazy Susans with one worry after the other, right? We kind of like keep circulating on those worries, and the more we think about worrisome thoughts, the more it affects our emotional well-being. So, in a way, if you think about our attention span, it can be kind of metaphorically, thought to be equal to a flashlight that we have in our hands. And there's a lot of things in front of us, right? Right now, there's a big classroom, there's sunlight outside, chairs and this and that, but we only are able to focus on a small proportion of that. Our attention span is very limited, right? There's a lot of studies on this. And whatever it is that we choose to pay attention to will trigger a bunch of thoughts. And those thoughts will then lead to our emotional states, right? And so by controlling what it is that we pay attention to, we can change our entire experience, right? So our experience is what I agree to attend to, what it is that I agree to pay attention to. And I like the word agree there because implicit in that is that there's a conscious choice being made, whether you know it or not, that you're paying attention to something. And the more you pay attention to more productive, more positive stimuli and thoughts and people, etc., the higher the chance that you're going to enjoy a better life at the end of it, right? So recognizing that you do have a choice here, and that choice that you make is going to have a huge impact on your life is super important. I've already talked about mindfulness and meditation, right? And the basic idea there is to gain this control over your mind, gain the ability to regulate your attention. If you sit down to focus on your breath or do a body scan and you have intruding thoughts and you kind of get distracted by them and follow them, but then at some point recognize that's what is happening and then come back to your breath, the more you keep doing it, the greater your ability becomes over time in order to pay attention to what it is that you do want to pay attention to and away from things that you do not want to pay attention to till you reach a point of kind of mastery over it, right? So now, if you have a shitty work week, but you're on vacation or with your family over the weekend, and you do not want to think about work, you can tell your mind, I do not want to think about it, and you have the ability to do it. It's like a superpower, and it's so important. Logically, hopefully it makes sense that this is going to be beneficial. And the thing then to do is to actually acquire that skill, which like any other skill is going to take 10,000 hours. You just sit down and practice it, every single day. No practice is in vain. No practice is lost. Every single time you get distracted, you bring your mind back to what it is you want to focus on. Another check mark, right? You're building that expertise one step at a time. Yes, Matt.
One thing I found helpful was for like racing thoughts at night, in periods of like high stress. I used to tell myself my only job right now is to sleep, and I'll think about this in the morning, but right now my only job is to sleep, and for some reason, that like.
That works.
Really well.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Very good. Yeah, you got to kind of like, develop these hacks that work for you. I have a similar kind of a thing. If I have a problem that's gnawing at me, or even a decision that I have to make for later on, right? And it's not really helpful ruminating about it right now. I just tell myself that's a later problem. That's a later problem. Just kind of reminding myself that's a later problem. Who knows? Evening I might feel like having an Italian food or Indian food. Why am I stressing out about it right now, right? Or why am I thinking about it right now? Chances are that I might have greater clarity on it, and I generally do when it comes time to make that decision. So no need to think about it right now, right? Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Okay, so I'm going to play you guys a clip by Sam Harris that's relevant to this general topic. And then let's see if you have any questions or comments about this short lecture. All right.
I was immediately hit with several small problems in my inbox, which, magnified by my mood, struck me as minor emergencies. And later that day at lunch with a friend, I began to complain about these problems. And my friend said two things that were extraordinarily wise. And here you'll see the psychological value of being in good company, but also the value of being someone who's committed to seeing his mind and life in a certain way. So after hearing me out, the first thing she said was, well, none of these problems seem that big, right? You can easily deal with these things. So the question is, do you really want to be this stressed out right now? Now, of course, that was a rhetorical question. She knew the answer was no, and she was simply reminding me that it was possible for me to be mindful of how my thoughts and emotions were arising in that moment, like a perpetual motion machine of dissatisfaction. She was reminding me that I could give them space, and that it was possible to achieve real equanimity in the present, whatever these problems were. But of course, if you don't know how to meditate, you can't really do that. You have to find some way to think yourself into a new state of mind. You have to begin solving the problems. Otherwise, you can't get off the ride. But if you can be mindful, you can change your state before you solve your problem or apparent problem, before you think your way through to a place of optimism about the future. So the fact that I wasn't paying close attention to the mechanics of my own mind was my real problem in that moment. I was the problem. What I was doing with my attention was the real proximate cause of my unhappiness. And my unhappiness was what was motivating me in that moment to brood about my problems. But then she addressed my situation on a conceptual level as well, which is often even more useful, because simply reminding someone to be mindful doesn't prevent him from falling back into the same pattern of thinking a minute or an hour later. Finding a new framework in which to think about a problem can. So she said, were you really expecting to have no more problems at some point in your life? You were just going to wake up one morning and none of this would be happening? There'd be nothing on your to-do list? Do you actually want nothing on your to-do list? Life is mostly about solving problems, and you can solve these. So my problem, more than anything else, was that I was treating problems themselves as anomalies. I was tacitly assuming that I should be able to get rid of all my problems and avoid any new ones. Even though this sounds ridiculous, that was implicit to my thinking and to my emotional life, to the way I was meeting each new problem. Of course, I can never get to a place where problems stop appearing, and neither can you. Life is an unending series of complications. So it doesn't make any sense to be surprised by the arrival of the next one. The magnitude of the problem might surprise you, but the fact that new complications in your life are arising hour by hour is absolutely to be expected. Right, very soon, some machine that you're relying on to do your work or to keep you comfortable is going to break. This is guaranteed to happen. You're also going to catch a cold in the not too distant future. And your plane will be late, or your luggage will get lost. At some point, you will injure your knee and need to see a doctor for it. It can't be any other way. Really, it can't be any other way. And the expectation that it can or should be some other way is a great source of unnecessary suffering. Suffering that actually makes it harder to solve the problems we happen to be faced with. Ironically, this is a problem that you can solve. And you can do that by expecting more problems to arise every day of your life. It's like you're playing a video game. Did you expect that there would be some incredibly boring level of this video game without problems? This is the game we call existence. Problems continually arise. So enjoy them.
All right. So I don't know if there are any thoughts about it. I found it to be particularly insightful for me. Yesterday in particular, because I was flying in from Mexico City and I had deliberately chosen not to check in my luggage so that I could exit the airport really fast out here. And they said, your luggage is too big. And I said, no. And they said, well, put it inside that box. And I put it in. And I said, see? And then he says, okay. And then when I tried to take it out, it wasn't coming out. And then he said, see? And I said, okay, but I got upset with him. I said, this is bullshit. And then I thought to myself, why am I getting so upset about it? So what? It's going to take another 15 minutes at the other end. So what? It's not a big deal. Why am I making such a big deal out of this? Anyway, so the fact that I listened to this lecture, in fact, yesterday, made it easier for me to deal with that. I mean, and you might think this is like, why are you getting upset? Raj, you're supposed to be a happiness guy. But I was caught in a moment of, anyway. So any comments, any thoughts on this? Okay. Yeah, so I wanted to play you that. And tip 5, the final tip, right, is to nurture an abundance mindset. Basically, you all know this, we've talked about this. We tend to marinate in what might be called a negativity bias mindset or scarcity mindset, that we don't have enough or whatever it is that we want, right? Love, fill in the blanks, money, power, fame, health, etc. And going back to that other kind of Sam Harris quote on how, 1 billion people would happily trade places with you, really you can, the glass is half full and you can choose to focus on the things that you do have, and you can nurture an abundance mindset rather than a scarcity mindset. And you have to be deliberative and conscious about it, because otherwise you're going to be pulled in the direction of your genetic hardwiring, which tends to emphasize negative things. And there's a reason for it, right? It helped us in our past when our goal was to survive, and survival wasn't, given, and it was difficult to survive. So paying attention to negative things was important for us. But, we happen to be in a very lucky position where we don't have to worry about survival anymore, right? I mean, you and I, we're guaranteed survival. We guaranteed 3 square meals a day, more if we want to, in fact. We're guaranteed living in an air-conditioned home. We're guaranteed getting a, automobile, if not our own cars, at least public transportation. We're guaranteed all of these things, which weren't guaranteed for the vast majority of people for the vast majority of time. In fact, for more than half the population right now, that's not in the world. That's not a guarantee, right? So we're hampered by a genetic propensity that helped us in the past. And what got us here now won't get us there now, So our aim is not to survive. Our aim is to thrive. Our aim is to flourish. Our aim is to be an agent of kindness and goodness to the world. And we are much better off doing all those things and having a higher chance of achieving that if we have, in fact, a positivity bias as opposed to a negativity bias, right? Which I think is going to be near to impossible because the genetic hardwiring is so strong, but you can definitely mitigate it. And so the idea here is to kind of do a bunch of things that consciously remind our subconscious that, hey, things are good. Stop worrying, things are good. People are nice. There are many people who like you, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's the idea here. And so the three good things, journaling is huge. And I'll remind you very quickly that the idea here is not to write about things that you're kind of, you've achieved, but rather things that you did not earn, that, you were granted, right? So just changing the narrative about the nature of the universe is what you're after, not, changing your opinion of yourself, right? So that's one thing that I would recommend. Taking a news fast, right? News tends to be negative, and the more you expose yourself to news, maybe in this day and age in particular, right, every time seems like even more intense than previous times. But basically, more you expose yourself to stimuli in general that nurtures a scarcity mindset, us versus them, the world is an unsafe place and people can't be trusted and there's more polarization and so on and so forth, it seeps into you, whether you like it or not. By osmosis, you're going to absorb it, and that is what you're going to, that's going to shape your narrative about the world. You're going to look at the world through jaundiced glasses, and the idea is to change them into, if not rose-tinted glasses, at least, plain glasses, right? So you won't even know that you're looking at the world through those glasses because that's how deep it is, okay? So the idea is to consciously do a bunch of things that changes the subconscious narrative that you have about the world. And seeking abundant stimuli. And this again, if you kind of explore or examine, we don't really stop and think about it, right? What kinds of books do you read? What kinds of shows do you watch, right? And what kind of narrative is it imprinting in your head? If you tend to like shows that have to do with revenge and the good wins against the bad, and people are put in their place, and somebody who's been wronged kind of seeks justice and redemption and wins in the end, it's entertaining, but it does nurture a scarcity orientation, right? As opposed to watching a show in which somebody rises above their own self-interest in order to do good to the world, right? So, it might seem like a small thing, but it makes a huge effect in the end when you kind of like think about the layers of exposure to a particular narrative over time, right? So be careful about who you hang out with, not in a judgmental way, but in a way that you're self-aware of the prioritization that you're giving to being centered first, right? Once you're really centered, then it won't matter as much what you expose yourself to. And it's not as if you're going to arrive at a point where you're centered for life either, right? So, but you'll be aware, right? If you're introspective, where you stand in terms of your emotional equanimity. And then, just be deliberative and conscious about who you get exposed to, right? Particularly people. People affect us a lot. And so if you're surrounding yourself with scarcity-minded people, that's going to be the mindset that you adopt over time. And so it becomes very important to go into a career path that nurtures a sense of abundance rather than scarcity, right? Many of the career paths, not to kind of, name any particular careers, but in general, right, if you go to Wall Street, chances are very high that you're going to walk away with a scarcity orientation. And ironically, it'll be when you can really afford to have an abundance orientation, at least in terms of money, right? But it doesn't really matter what the extrinsic circumstances are, external circumstances are. What matters much more is how you view the world, right? If you have a lot of money, but you think in terms of scarcity, that's going to affect your happiness more. So that's the idea here. Actually, I said like 5 tips, but last tip, but there is a bonus I want to end with. So I like this idea of a happiness project. This is a term from a book called The Happiness Project by somebody called Gretchen Rubin, who's not a happiness researcher, but she read through research on happiness, and she said, hey, here are a bunch of things that apparently improve your happiness. And so I'm going to take one thing per month, and I'm going to kind of experiment with that thing. So one of the things that she had read is waking up in the morning and doing your bed, right? Turns out that it improves your happiness levels. And so I'm going to do that this month, the whole month. Then next month, I'm going to do something else. And I'm going to layer this on top of the thing that I did last month. And I'm going to keep that thing that I did last month if it turned out to have a positive effect on my happiness. So that's the idea. So here are a few things that I do. And I'm just giving you my own example. You don't have to use exactly this. Obviously, you can. In fact, I would encourage you to put in things that speak to you or you're really curious about trying. There is such a thing as a happiness personality fit. Maybe I talked a little bit about it earlier, but certain things seem to work better for certain people. So we've talked about a lot of different things that you could do, including leading a healthy lifestyle or expressing gratitude, practicing forgiveness, right? Some of these things might be easier for you to do for whatever reason, right? You got to gravitate toward things that you can do and you find to be effective. So yeah, so here are a few things I do. So I start the day with, I call it counting blessings, but maybe that's not quite appropriate. I kind of think through what's coming up in my day, right? So today I woke up in the morning. So today's the last day of classes, and I love, interacting with students, right? I mean, this is something that I find a lot of meaning in. And so it's a bittersweet moment at some level, but at least I get to kind of spend one more session with you all. And so I was thinking about that, right? So I'm kind of like excited about it. I'm happy about the fact that I get to spend one last session with you all. So just when you're going through the things that are coming up in your day, and maybe there's really nothing that you can think of that's positive, right? That you can count as a blessing. But surely there's some things that you can choose to do, like, for example, that I'm going to just take 5 minutes to have a nice cup of coffee, right? I'm going to really smell my coffee. I'm going to go outside and sit and watch the sunrise or whatever it is, right? I'm going to take my dog for a walk. Or, it could be that you get to pamper yourself in the evening. If there's nothing else going on, go get a massage or a manicure, right? So think of something that's coming up that you cherish, right? You have the opportunity to engage in this. So think of at least one thing, right? Start the day. I've already talked about this. Okay. Get this too, I've talked about. So this I really love. And it takes a little bit of getting used to if you're not used to it. And it doesn't matter which part of the world I am in. I've done it even in Sweden, right? But basically, in my showers, I do 22 seconds. 22 is my favorite number. Okay. I do at least 22. I try and do 66, right? Which is nice, 22. The reason why I try and do at least a minute is because that's what's been researched, that if you, cryotherapy, right? 1 minute, it builds what are called brown fat cells, right? It actually doesn't add the number of brown fat cells in your body, but it just makes the quality of those brown fat cells better. And those brown fat cells are very, very predictive of other kinds of health benefits, including blood pressure and so on. But you'll actually notice a significant boost in your general levels of energy and happiness immediately after you take a cold shower. Okay, at least for me, it works. I know that for some people, there's individual differences again, right? So I have a huge effect of exercising or going for a run on my happiness. My wife doesn't at all, right? So, you might discover that it doesn't, but chances are it will. There's a guy called Wim Hof who does a lot of research on this topic. He's from the Netherlands on cold showers and cryotherapy. So if you're interested, you can take a look at it. Okay, so this is something that I learned from my Orange Theory fitness coach. This is along the same kind of lines as, taking the steps, every opportunity that you get, which I'm going to talk about too. But basically, balance becomes very important as you get older, right? When you're younger, strength and stamina seem to be very important, but as you get older, balance and flexibility become more important. And so the idea is to kind of like do a little thing every day that kind of, emphasizes balancing. And so wearing socks, and particularly wearing shoes if you're just standing, is a little bit difficult, right? You've got to be on one leg as you're doing this. So that's something that you can do. Take stairs, I already talked about it. 5-minute mindfulness practice every day goes a long way over time. We've already talked about mindfulness. So this is something that I do too, is to measure my vital statistics on an everyday basis. I just measure my blood pressure. There's something called the white coat syndrome. When you want to measure your blood pressure, the fact that it might be high might stress you out, and so it might shoot it up a little bit more, right? So you don't get an accurate idea of how good your blood pressure is or bad it is if you only measure it once in a while. So I just do it every day. I also measure my body fat percentage, particularly visceral fat, which is the fat around your organs, is important. And there are machines these days that do it, and you can kind of like use an app that will transmit the information over to your app, and so you can actually keep track of it over time. Set limit on social media for obvious reasons. Invest in a hobby, right? I like singing, particularly old Hindi, which is a language, Indian language, movie songs. And so I nurture a hobby, and it's kind of relatively obvious why that's important, right? Not only do you kind of like feel like you're progressing toward mastery, It also gets you into flow states and so on. So that's important. And then I end the day with 3 good things journaling, which I've talked about. And the very final month, you can do all of the 11 above, right? Make sure that you're not kind of letting anything slip through the cracks. And in fact, I have a Google sheet in which I've been doing it for like 8 years now. So every year is its own tab. And it took a little bit of time to kind of create 365 days with 11 different rows for each of these things. And I basically go there and put in check mark or an X, depending on whether I managed to do it or not. So you can kind of like at a glance, get a bird's eye picture of how well the year has gone or a month has gone or even a week has gone over time. So the last thing I'll say here is that each of these things might seem really small, but there is a thing in a totally different field. There is a concept called emergent complexity, right? So the idea here is that each molecule of water doesn't have the property of wetness. But if you add a critical number of molecules together, then they acquire this thing that at the individual level, it did not have that. Right? Ants, for example, each ant by itself doesn't have the propensity or the quality of building a colony or, like making a complex society. But when you add a critical number of ants together, it's suddenly this property that's more complex emerges out of it, right? It's almost as if, I don't know if you guys have seen those 3D pictures, right? Where you have to kind of be slightly out of focus for something to jump out of it. You know what I'm talking about? I'm getting a bunch of blank stares. This used to be pretty popular maybe 25 years ago where, there's this picture and it's just a bunch of dots and stuff like that, right? Shapes. And you have to be a little bit out of focus. And if you kind of do it, then suddenly an elephant or something jumps out of it. If you're completely unaware of it, I'll send you guys a link to it. It takes a little bit of time to acquire that ability to kind of be out of focus. And if you don't see it, you'll be like, this is bullshit. And it's not really true, but I can tell you that it is. Okay, so if you could remind me to send them this picture. Anyway, so this thing of emergent properties, which is that each of these things, right, maintaining a journal, healthy lifestyle, taking the stairs, may not seem to really amount to much at all, but there is a compounding that goes on. And if you do each of these things, in particular, if you're like diligent over a significant period of time, then all of a sudden there's this, you're boosted, from the inside. And you just feel like, yeah, like I'm significantly better in terms of my mental clarity and my emotional state and my relationships and everything just gets a boost. That doesn't seem to make sense at the individual level, that each of these things only contributed a little bit, but all of a sudden together, they have this synergistic compounding effect. Okay, so I do want to urge you to be patient, right, when you try these things out. And I think that there's a very high chance that you end up discovering what I've discovered, which is that they do have a significant compounding effect. All right, so that's all I had. Thank you very much for coming into my life. I really appreciate this opportunity, and it was wonderful. No pressure, but if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'd love it. I'd love to stay in touch. And, if you happen to move out and come back to Austin, you want to grab a cup of coffee or whatever, catch up, I'm more than happy to do that. All right. It was special having you guys in my life. Take care. All the best. Okay. I do want to mention that the grades will be out by early next week. We'll try and do it by the end of the week, but certainly by early next week. And I'll also send comments to all of you on your creative altruism presentations. Bye-bye. Bye. Take care. Bye. Bye. Take care.